Hello everyone. Today we're going to have our second day of changing to slope intercept form. So that is why you see the day two notes, because we're literally just continuing and practicing the concept that we learned at the beginning of this week, which is changing to slope intercept form so that way we can graph a line. Notice that this is just a practice day to kind of clean some things up and make sure you have a fuller understanding of slope intercept form and how to graph lines. So there's a couple things I want to remind you guys before we even start, and it is what is slope intercept form. So remember that whenever I say slope intercept form, your mind needs to automatically go to y equals mx plus e. You need to train your mind to see this because, again, why do they even call this a slope intercept form? Because if you have it in this form, if y is by itself, you could identify the slope and the y-intercept just by looking at it. There's no work done as these are look and see problems if you have it in slope-intercept form. Your slope is always going to be multiplying the x, and your y-intercept is going to be what is adding or subtracting to that x. And then, of course, we could use the y-intercept and the slope to graph a line in our coordinate system. So make sure that you understand that, so that way you could use it when graphing. So let's go ahead, let's start. So for number one, is the directions are to sketch the graph of a line. And again, whenever you see the graph, something along those lines, your mind should be like, okay, y equals mx plus b. Because all I need to do in order to graph a line is know the y-intercept and the slope. Now, looking at this equation here, is your y by itself on any side of the equation? The answer is yes. That means for the most part, you have it in slope-intercept form. Now, your slope is always going to be what's multiplying the x. So in this situation, it's going to be a 4. Your y-intercept that's represented with the b is going to be what you're adding and subtracting. So it's going to be a 2. Now, I know it doesn't say to identify the slope and the y-intercept, but I want you to do it for all these problems and also on your guys' homework. So make sure that you do that. All right, so I believe that the blue is step one. Step one is identifying if you have slope-intercept form, so that way you can recognize or identify the slope and the y-intercept. Now you have to use it. Now remember that the y-intercept represents where your graph crosses the y-axis. This is the y-axis going up and down. Your graph intersects at 2, so that means I'm going to put a big old dot to tell the reader, hey, my graph crosses at this point. Now I'm going to use my slope. Now keep in mind that your slope is 4 to figure out how steep steep this graph is going. Now remember that slope is the change in y over change of x. Notice that this isn't over anything. So I'm going to put it over 1 so that way I can visually see that, hey, for every 4 times I change in the y direction, I'm going to change 1 time in the x direction. So let me go ahead and do that and show you how to do that on this graph. So here is my point. This is where I know my graph exists. I'm going to go up 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and now I'm going to go over 1 in the x direction. So again, make sure you understand slope. Make sure you actually put the lines too. A lot of students won't do the lines. So they'll do the coordinate points, but they won't draw the line. Remember, our goal is to graph the line, so make sure you actually graph it. So that is pretty much what I want you guys to be able to do. One, identify whether you have an equation in slope-intercept form, and if you do, identify the slope and the y-intercept and use that to graph it. Now let's go ahead and do number 2. Is just more examples. Again, I want this to become super mechanical work. So just the more you practice, the more you're going to get used to, the more you're going to train your brain to look at pieces to help you out. All right, so the first thing I need to do is identify whether my y is by itself, because if it is, I have it in slope-intercept form. Now, this equation is in slope-intercept form because my y is by itself to the left. That means it's really easy to identify my slope, which in this situation is a negative 3 over 2. My y-intercept is going to be whatever I'm adding subtracting, so it's going to be a positive 4. So if I'm going to use these 2 pieces to graph that line, I'm going to start with my y-intercept of 4, which is right over here, and then I'm going to use my slope to figure out the steepness, or where my next coordinate point is to draw the line. Remember, change in y over change of x, so I'm going to change negative 3 in the y direction for every change of 2 in the x direction. So negative in the y direction means down, so I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3. I'm going to go over 2 in the x direction because it's a positive 2. that is my graph, and that's pretty much the basics. That's if you ever see an equation that starts off with y equals mx plus b, that's good news because it's straightforward. You just gotta know where to look and train your mind what to do with the slope and the y-intercept. Now, what happens if something's not in y equals mx plus b form, like numbers 3 through 6? I know it seems a little overwhelming, but they're not that crazy more difficult. Let's write this over here for a little more space. Now remember, in order to be in slope-intercept form, your y has to be by itself. So I like to draw that line because that way I see two sides of an equation. I circle my y because I want that y to be by itself. It helps me visually see what I need to get rid of. And what I need to get rid of is that 2x. Now it's a positive 2x, so the opposite of a positive 2x is a negative 2x. Remember, what you do to one side, you have to do to the other. That's why I also like that vertical line because it helps me see two sides of an equation. Now I cannot combine these two, so I'm just going to rewrite them over. That's 1 minus 2x, so I'm just going to rewrite it as 1 minus 2x, which equals y. Now I want to see this work. I want to see you do the actual algebra to find or to get your equation into slope-intercept form and then also identify it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now that my y is by itself, I know I can identify my slope and my y-intercept. Remember, your slope is always what's multiplying your x is the coefficient. So in this situation, it's going to be negative 2. Your b is a positive 1. So now we're going to use that information in order to graph it. So my y-intercept is going to be a positive 1. I always like to put it over 1, or my slope under 1, so that way I can see the rise and the run, the change of y over change of x. So change of y divided by change of x. My change of y is a negative 2, so I'm going to go down 2. My change of x is 1, so I'm going to move over 1, and that is my graph. All right, so just for time's sake, I'm going to work a little bit. Try these problems on your own. See if you agree with me on your notes, so that way you know how to do these problems. All right, so doing the same thing over, I like to put a line down my equal sign, circle my y variable, so that way I know what I need to get rid of. Now, if you notice in this problem, you have several things to get rid of. You have that x, you have that 10, you have that 2. Always get rid of what you're adding or subtracting. Kind of a rule of thumb, sometimes just get rid of whatever's farther from the y. So I like to start with that x. It's a positive x, so I'm going to minus x on both sides. I end up with a 10 plus 2y is equal to 0 minus a negative x. Remember, anything plus or minus 0 is just itself, so I'm just going to write down the negative x. Now, I still have to get rid of that 10 and that 2. Remember, get rid of what you're adding and subtracting first. So here I go, minusing the 10. I'm left with 2y is equal to a negative x minus 10. Almost done. All I got to do now is divide by 2. Now remember that when solving for y, if you have a coefficient, that coefficient is multiplying. So the opposite would be to divide. These cancel out. You're left with y is equal to, now what is the coefficient of this x? It is a 1. It helps me see that I have a negative 1/2 x. And then negative 10 divided by 2 is a negative 5. Now you can see that your slope is a negative 1/2. The y-intercept is a negative 5. Rule of thumb again, I always like to put that little 1 there so that way it can help me see that I have a negative 1/2. Don't change it into decimal form because it shows your rise and your run, so it's helpful as a fraction. Let's start with our y-intercept, which is negative 5. My slope is down 1 over 2 because the change in y is negative 1, so down 1, and then over 2. So that is my graph, and I can go on to the next final 2 problems. All right, so notice that these are not in y equals mx plus b form, so I need to get it to y equals mx plus b form. Now let me make sure I wrote the problem right. I'm going to write a line down my equal sign. I can clearly see I need to get rid of the 5 and the 10. Again, train your mind to get rid of what you're adding and subtracting. So I'm going to get rid of this positive 10 first before I get rid of that 5. I'm left with 5y is equal to negative 6x minus 10. And then I'm going to divide by 5. Don't forget to divide everything by 5. Y is equal to a negative 6/5 x minus 2. Or negative 2, doesn't really matter, the same thing. So don't forget to identify your slope and your y-intercept. I want to see this step because I want to make sure that you are identifying them correctly. So I can see that my slope here, my b is negative 2, so I'm going to start at negative 2. My Slope is -6 over +5. So the change of y or change of x, I'm gonna go down 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then over 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So notice that this problem went way off the charts. It's okay as long as I see some general. I'm going to be okay because this is where the majority of the grade is going to be at, and then your graph is just kind of it falls off the page. It happens. So don't be afraid. Just to go off the page and go from there. I'll try my best to count these and see where we go. All right, so let me make sure to double check. We have our last one. I'm going to write it over here. -2y is equal to 4 minus 3x. Now, the biggest mistake I see students do is they learn how to do things so mechanically that they get used to doing the wrong step. For instance, I'm solving for y, I see a -2, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. Now, keep in mind that this -2 is not adding or subtracting to that y. You're trying to undo everything that's done to that y, and then -2 is multiplying. So the actual reverse operation would be the divide, because the opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide everything by -2. Make sure you're not that student prior. These cancel out the -2, so you're left with y is equal to 4 divided by -2, which is a -2. A negative and a negative is a positive. I can't reduce 3 halves at all, so I'm going to leave them as 3 halves x. And now you know what your slope is and your y-intercept. Your slope is going to be a positive 3 halves, and your y-intercept is going to be a -2. So looking at my y-axis, there is -2. Change of y over change of x, I'm going to go up 3, 1, 2, 3, and over 2, 1, 2. So there is my coordinate point, there's my line, and I am done. Your practice is literally just these over. I know it seems like it's 10 problems, which is not that much. You just have to get mechanical, so that's why we're going to practice and practice till you get this.